Interviewing a homeschooling mom of 4, Carrie Strong, and she is the author of You Can Homeschool. And we're going to be talking about all sorts of things, homeschooling, about becoming an author, and some of the stories that she's heard from other homeschooling parents. There will be a lot going on here. So Carrie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us at the Homeschool ThinkTank Parenting Podcast. And let's get started by finding out. I'm curious why you started homeschooling your kids.
Sure. Yeah. So I was one of those moms, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, that I thought I would never homeschool. I went to a public school and turned out just fine, and thought there's no way, because I'm super task oriented. And I thought even before I had kids, I would watch other moms. I'm like, I can't wait. And when I have kids, I'm going to be counting down the days until all of them are in school so that I can get my stuff done. So I was just not at all, it wasn't even on my radar to homeschool. But I put my son, my firstborn, so when he turned 5, my firstborn son, I'm like, okay, you're off to school. And he was probably the first one on the enrollment list. So I was just like, there's no way I'm going to homeschool. I didn't even think about it. So I had done a lot of like preschool stuff with the kids, and like even called myself a homeschool mom during their preschool years. But I was like, I'm not doing that beyond the preschool years. So I put my son into a Montessori preschool. My mom was a Montessori teacher, and so that's where I sent him. And I dropped him off, and there was just like this sinking feeling of, I'm sure like the first, I don't know, I was like in tears and feeling just really sad to watch him go. He was really small, and he was walking away through this huge crowd of kids, and I was just like, am I doing the right thing? And I was like, probably, because most moms probably feel this way. But that feeling didn't go away, and I kept wanting my child back. So I would go and volunteer, and I would watch him exert all of his positive energy during the day, and then come home with nothing left for his family. And the same thing would happen with me. I would have all this positive energy for my other kids at home, and he'd come home and he'd get the grumpy side of me. And I just thought, like, I want my son back. So I actually, like when I would go to his classroom to volunteer, it was actually painful for me because I just wanted to take him home. So my husband and I, we started praying about it, and then all of these ideas started flooding my head. Like, what if I taught my kids out in nature? What if instead of pulling them out of life to learn about life, they would just learn it naturally? Like, what if I started cooking with them? What if we would just go to the store and naturally start buying things together? And I just had all of these ideas flood my head, and thought, oh, I want to do this. And it was kind of like this grace fell on me to do it. It wasn't out of guilt or obligation or any sense of duty. It was just like, I'm going to homeschool. Like, and so we prayed about it. And the verse that says, teach us to number our days. I'm not exactly sure where that's found. Some proverb that says, teach us to number our days so that we gain a heart of wisdom, came to my mind as I was praying. And I'm like, that's it. Like, I don't know how many days I have left with my kids. I have such a small window of time to influence them. And so both my husband and I were on board, and we said, we're going to do this. So I wrote a letter to the school and told them I'm pulling my son around Christmas time, let him finish the semester. And he was excited about it. I was excited about it. And we've never looked back.
Okay. So you said something that interests me. Your husband was totally on board.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's always the case. It's not like it's never the case, obviously.
Right.
But
yeah.
Not all husbands are on board. How did your conversations go where he was on board with that with you? Did you sort of arrive at this together, or?
I think he was more interested in homeschooling before I was, which is, I know, a very unique situation. He was actually homeschooled himself. So in his mind, he was like, it's always been an option. To me, I'm like, well, I was in the public school. I'm not going to do this. So when I told that I was feeling like I wanted to homeschool, he was just like, of course. Like to him, it was just such a natural thing.
He
So
jumped
I know a
on
lot of
it.
people, yeah.
So he must have had a good homeschooling experience then.
He did. Yeah. His mom was very intentional about finding natural ways to implement different lessons. And he remembers more from those years than and his mom eventually ended up putting him in high school. He went to a Christian high school because she got to the point where she could no longer teach him math. So she thought, well, I'm just going to put them in school. But most of what he remembers or whatever he tells me is from his homeschooling years. And he says, like, a lot of the stuff that I learned in school, I don't even really remember. So,
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Can I ask, and if you don't want to speak for him, that's okay. I'm like, I'd love to interview your husband. But
Yeah.
does he wish he would have homeschooled through high school, or is he glad he went to high school? I'm always curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think he wanted to at the time.
To go?
I think he wanted to go for the experience, the socialization.
Just to
But
know.
when he talks about it, like a lot of his experiences were not positive experiences. So I would be curious to ask him now, do you wish that your mom would have continued homeschooling? That's something I've never asked him.
You're going to get off here and ask him
Interesting.
today.
I know.
Okay, so I was just curious about that. So when you started homeschooling, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. You mentioned pre-interview that you were a classroom teacher. Am I remembering that correctly? Okay, so
Yep.
what grades
Yeah.
did you teach?
I taught, so ironically, I don't have a teaching degree. But the first year, so I moved overseas right after college. And for 2 years, I taught in the Dominican Republic. And the first year, I taught a whole bunch of things. They kind of just put me wherever there was a need. So it was French, music, art, and Bible to middle school age. And then the second year that I was there, I taught second grade. So
okay,
it was
so you taught in a classroom, but you didn't have to have a teaching degree there. And so I'm curious about your experiences. Now,
yeah.
I'm not sure if we have listeners in the Dominican Republic or not, but I'm curious about your experiences in the classroom and what you liked and didn't like about that, and how you felt well, let's just start there, and then I have another question.
Yeah. So having never been a teacher, it was like my first year was just a whole learning experience and I mean, I learned completely from all of my failures of like what not to do. It was a different culture, and I had the same expectations on the Dominican children that I had of my own culture. And they were not used to the kind of structure that we have in the United States. It's much more laid back. When you walk by the classrooms of a public school, it's almost like complete what we would think of as chaos. In their mind, that's how it functions and works. But I was trying to mold them into my American way rather than trying to adapt to their Dominican way. So that first year was a struggle. Even with the language barrier, there was a lot of miscommunication that took place. So it was definitely I learned from my failures that year.
What did you like better? Did you like how classrooms are in the United States better, or the Dominican Republic?
I like it here because I'm used to that. I'm not used to the chaos. And so it was hard for me to find how to work in that.
And it sounds like you said already, you're a very task-oriented person. I'm thinking probably a personality type A from what you've said. So, so that was really difficult for you. But what do you think? How do you think the children learned better?
I think,
you set your own feelings aside.
They learned a lot better through relationships. And I watched and observed them with their Dominican teacher, and she just had a natural way with them, but you could see that the children just loved her. So she took time first to develop relationships with these kids before she went straight to the textbook. And I think that that's where I went wrong, was I didn't even really take that time to, even outside of school, just get to know my kids,
Mhm.
and let them know first and foremost that they're loved and accepted, um, before I had just been like, here's what we need to do. Here's all the tasks, and
Well,
let's get, yeah.
I found it very difficult because I very much just connected with my kids when they were
Mm,
preschool age, but as soon as
mhm.
they turned 5 and you feel like you're supposed to be doing school, and here's
Mhm.
what school looks like. Here's
Mhm.
what education and learning look like in the
Yeah.
United States. So you start trying to do that in your own home. And I found that I started
Huh.
putting the curriculum before the connection with my children, and it really was
Yeah.
not effective.
Right. Yep.
So I can
Yes,
see where even in a
exactly.
classroom, that connection, my favorite teachers connected
Yeah.
with me as a kid, you
Yeah.
know. My actually
Absolutely.
my two favorite every favorite teacher I had were the teachers that read to us every day.
Mm.
Those were my
Wow.
favorite teachers.
That's funny you say that, because now that I look back, I can see that.
Yeah,
I can
because you
absolutely see
connect
that.
through
Yeah.
books.
You
You really
do.
connect. You
Mm-hmm.
talk about things, and the teacher would
Mm-hmm.
ask you questions. And so I think
Yep.
I personally, and this isn't because I've done everything so perfectly. It's mostly because I failed a lot, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I really think that your number one job as a homeschooling parent is to stay connected with your child. And if you don't have a connection,
Right.
establish that before you dive into
Yeah.
curriculum. I mean, not
Absolutely.
to say you
Yeah.
ignore that, but the connection should be priority.
Mm-hmm.
But
Wow. Yeah.
so when you started homeschooling your child, you bring him home from school, how did that look for you? What did a school day, quote unquote, look like?
Yeah. Well, after I came back from the Dominican, I taught in a traditional American school. And so I was K through 12 Spanish. And I just kind of took everything that I did at school or in the public school home. So
Mm-hmm.
initially I had, you know, the ABCs all up on the board, and I had like my chalkboard, and I had a desk, and I mean, I still do. So let's just be honest, but like it's morphed and changed a lot to be much more natural. But initially, it looked like a schoolroom at home. So that's kind of like, that's all I knew. That's all I knew how to do. I didn't know about
That's
Charlotte
what
Mason. I didn't know about any of the different methods that were out there that were different from just the traditional method.
I believe that's what most people do because it's what we know and what we're comfortable
Hmm.
with.
Right.
Do you
Yep.
think that?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So how has homeschooling evolved for you?
Yeah.
You say a little more natural.
Mm.
What does a typical school day look like for your family now?
Yeah. So I'll talk about when I fell into my groove, because this is what I want my school day to go back to. This was like pre-COVID, pre a whole bunch of family drama. Um, since then, a typical day, like I just went through a pregnancy, just had a baby. So I mean, it looked a lot different this year. But during that time, this was like my ideal situation where I still had the curriculum. I still had it there as a resource, but instead of it being where I was a slave to my curriculum, it now was a slave to me. It served me instead. So I would go through and use my curriculum as a resource, like to give me ideas of things to teach. And then when I would teach them, instead of just like talking about them in the classroom setting, we would go out and actually experience them. So, for example, if in my Bible class we're talking about Noah, that year we went to go see the replica of Noah's Ark in Kentucky, and that turned out to be just like one of the best experiences, not just for my kids, but for me. I felt like the Lord was speaking to me through that experience. So that was just kind of like that year. It was like even in our health class, it was like, here are the things that we need to have good hygiene: brushing your teeth, clipping your nails, brushing your hair, all those things. And then I was like, okay, kids, tell me what the things are that we need to do to have good hygiene. They're like, I don't know. So like all right, let's march downstairs. We're going to cut your nails. We're going to brush your hair. We're going to take a bath. We're going to do all these things and make sure that you know what good hygiene is. So afterwards, I'm like, okay, tell me what we do to have good hygiene. And then they could list everything. So it's just taking what you, I mean, you can't do that in a classroom. I can't take my students and physically go give them a bath and like cut their nails and wash their hair,
No.
but
You would be sued for that.
yeah, exactly.
So,
Right. Yeah.
so now you've had a baby and you're sort of wanting to
Mhm.
go back into where you're using the curriculum to help your family more than your family fitting their life into curriculum. Your curriculum
Right.
fits into your family's life.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And now in the meantime, you've also at some point started writing a book, right?
I did. Yeah.
And how did you even start with that? Where did that come from?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, like in 2020, we had found our groove, or I'm sorry, 2019. And as soon as 2020 hit, it was like COVID. My dad had a stroke. My sister went through a divorce. We had all kinds of crazy things happen in our family. And I just threw school out. I'm like, we're just going to read. And like, my kids did everything on their own that year. Like the Lord just filled in the gaps for me because I couldn't be there for them the way that I had been before. And they had started doing it on their own. So they were doing their math, they were doing their reading. But sorry, your initial question was how did I get into a book? So
That's
that year
okay.
my
Go
dad
there.
had
That's fine.
okay. Well that year my dad had a stroke and we decided to sell our house and move out to Arizona to be with my parents because we didn't know how much time he had left. My sister and her husband live out in Arizona as well. And my sister had just had a baby. It was during when COVID first started. And she's like, Carrie, I don't want my kids in school, but I can't teach them because I just had a baby and I've never homeschooled and I don't know what to do. Like, help me out here. So originally this started out as like, well, let me just give you like some quick instructions. Like, I'm going to just outline some of the basic things about homeschooling so that you just kind of have like a cheat sheet and you can just take this and know the things that I wish I had known before I started homeschooling. So that's how it started. And then I just kept going with it. I kept digging deeper and deeper into like the different methods that are out there. And it just started to evolve into an actual book. So I went to a writers convention a year and a half ago. So a year ago from January, I went to a writing convention and just to get ideas and to even see if something could come of this. And I met with a publisher there and he said, Carrie, you have to double your word count. We don't publish books that short. So I was like, oh, okay. So that is what inspired me to go and start interviewing a whole bunch of other moms. So I was like, well, I'm just going to take this and run with it. And I've always wanted to know what life looked like for other moms and just to step into their world and see like, am I missing something? What are they doing? And what ended up happening was it was just so fulfilling to me. And I learned so much in that process of interviewing all of these moms. And then that ended up doubling the word count of my book. So I was very thankful for that experience. I have to give credit to my husband because he played single dad that year. It was the year that my dad was really, really sick that year, had dementia. And it was kind of my outlet. It was writing is my way of just being able to get some sanity back. And
I feel you.
Yeah. So that year, my husband would just be like, just go write. We need our mom back. So we know that when you're writing, we've got happy mom here. So he would play single mom for that whole year, single dad, I mean, and just let me write. And that's what I did that year. And it was just so fulfilling to even hear what other moms do out there. And then my sister didn't even end up homeschooling. So, but she put her kids in school. And I was like, you know what? The Lord used that because like it inspired me to write this. And I wouldn't have never done that if you hadn't been interested in homeschooling.
Yeah. And that's, I have found the confession hour here. So writing a book, working on Homeschool Think Tank, it like fills me up. It lights
Yeah.
me up because I think so
Mhm.
often as homeschooling parents, we are so all about our kids and
Mhm.
everything is for the kids. And in
Mhm.
a way, yes, all of what I do does serve my kids. But honestly, I do it because I love it. I'll keep doing this for
Mm.
decades after my kids are, I mean, my oldest is 18. She's done. And I'm not too
Mm.
far off from done with my second. Like I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And it's, I'm not going to quit. Like I love this and I love interviewing people like you and
Mm.
making these connections, but also writing, working on my website, working on a book, working on a
Right.
podcast, whatever. Like I like the creation mode and
Mhm.
you're you're helping other people when you're creating if you share it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it helps us to be better moms when we
Mhm.
take a little bit of time for ourselves.
Yeah,
I just
it
talked to
is.
yeah, I just talked to the not the nursery worker, but the children's coordinator at our church. And she just
Mhm.
told me this yesterday that she's like, Carrie, I just had to take time for myself this week and I started doing crafts again and it just helped recharge me to where I can come to church and do this and feel full instead of serving on an empty tank.
Yeah, you can't help anybody on an empty tank. Not very.
Right.
You might be out there and physically present, but your mind's not there. Your
Mm-hmm.
attitude isn't where it needs to be. So, any mom, dad who's like the homeschooling parent, full-time grandparent, whatever, if you're that person
Mm-hmm.
doing the full-time, you still have to take that time to recharge yourself. And at times it can feel selfish because
Mm-hmm.
your husband's out there doing it
Yeah.
all. And at
Right.
times it is selfish. And I am being selfish because I need to take care of me sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
but on the flip side, it is giving too, because then I
Yeah.
come back in and I am full of excitement, life, whatever. But
Yeah.
building this business, while it hasn't done so quite yet in a large way, but at some point it will in a large way financially feed my family,
Mm.
because I'm not building this with a short term outlook. I'm looking at like a business that outlives me.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want to
Mm.
build, and it serves a lot of people in the too, right? So
Yeah.
there it, and it's funny because like I was the last person you ever thought would start an online business or write a book or any of those things. But did you feel that way when you started writing your book? I felt very honestly, I was embarrassed to tell anybody I was writing a book. Did you feel that way?
Oh yeah. I'm like, who am
Oh,
I to write a book? Who for
high
sure. Yeah, right.
five.
That's and I never even thought it would ever get published. It was like I feel like I can learn just as much from the people that I'm speaking to right now than they can from me. And I think that
Yeah.
that's like it's humbling to know that like there's a physical copy of this like in my
Yeah.
hands like
Yeah,
that
hold it up. Let's see it.
like
Let's see it.
it looks like this. I don't know if
Oh,
you can
it's
see.
there
There we
we
go.
go. There we go. Oh, and I like your cover a lot. I remember seeing it, but
Oh,
before
thank you.
when you emailed me, but yes. No, it is. It feels good, doesn't it? Because you're like, wow, you took this thing, you're just sort of helping somebody out. It's an idea in your mind and you make it real. And
Mm-hmm.
you know what? I felt that way too, Carrie. Like, and I still can feel this way. Like,
Mm.
who am I to be talking to all these people? Like, sometimes I am in utter like disbelief at times because there are so many people around the world listening to this
Mm-hmm.
podcast every week. But
Mm-hmm.
you know who you are. You're a mom who stepped up to answer questions other people had, to help other people. And that's, I've come to decide that experts in this world are the people who will step up, who will push their fear to the side and just keep on going through it
Mm-hmm.
over and over. It's like doing the breaststroke through the fear. Woo,
Yeah.
and
I
you
like Dory,
just,
just keep swimming.
there you
Just
go.
keep swimming. Yeah. I have to
But
tell
yes,
myself that all the time.
and
Yep.
eventually if you keep down that path, you do become an expert of sorts in some way or not another, and but the experts are the people who will just keep going and keep helping others. And, you know, and so I think that is really natural to feel like, who am I to do this? And I'm really going down this path a little bit, because I know there will be a day when I'm really wanting to help parents who want to start something, an online business, start something to serve other homeschoolers, other people, even if they're not homeschoolers. And I want you to know in your mind, like, these are things that really happen. You're like, well, who am I to teach this?
Right.
Who am I to tell other people how to do this? And what you're not necessarily, I'm not telling anybody how to homeschool. I'm saying, here's a lot of ways that people do this. Here's a lot of stories you can listen to of how other people did it. Here's some ideas. Take what you like and discard the rest.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yep.
But yeah, it can be very daunting, and it can be hard. So do you remember the first time you told somebody that you were writing a book that maybe wasn't your husband and children?
I do. It was my dad. He's no longer here, but he was my hero. He told me I could do anything. So I mean, I don't have I like to sing, but I don't have the greatest voice out there. He's like, you could go on American Idol. Like, I mean, he was just that kind of person. He would tell me I could do anything. Yeah. And it made it happen. Like, he believed in me and was like, you can do this. And I think his voice still just stays in my head, that if I can do it, anybody can do it. And you just need to have the right encouragement out there. And my sister Christine was also extremely encouraging too. She was like, I think your next step is to go to a writer's convention and just learn. I'm like, that's the next step.
Yes. And that's all you have to know is the step you're working on and the next step.
And the next one. Yep.
You don't have to know all the steps. You just, the next step. And now you're here on this podcast with me as part of a next step of sharing your book, right?
Exactly.
So it's the next logical step, the next place to go.
Right.
And there could be a lot of different pathways and steps that you could take, but you just have to choose one and go with it.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
So tell me a little bit more about, how did you work in the time? So your husband really filled in a lot, it sounds like. Did you have certain times of the day, or did you become like obsessed like I did at some point?
Oh yeah, there were definitely times. It was normally in the evening, usually after the kids would go down for a couple hours. So it wouldn't be too crazy for him, because he would like to do his own thing, read books or do whatever. So it's just kind of both of our downtime that I used to write the book. But there were definitely times where I would get an idea in my head in the middle of the night, and I'm like, I got to write this down before I lose it. And then it would be like 4 a.m. before I'd get to bed. So the next morning, my husband would be like, why are you so tired today? I'm like, well, I have a confession to make.
Oh my gosh, confession hour. I can hear you on that. For me, it's when my husband is out of town. Oh my gosh, I can stay up dang near all night long. I can just stay up and stay up and stay up. And I've gotten much better, because I'm like, I really do value sleep. But there are some times where, especially if I haven't felt like I've been able to really immerse myself in my work, because, you know, as a mom, there's all these distractions, and, you got to take the kids to this and this and this. And one daughter, I'm done driving around, but the other one, I'm still driving around. She's getting close to driving. Yeah, I'm still doing all the driving and getting her here and there. And so it can be very difficult to just be like in your own head, which is where you need to be when you're writing, right? So, okay. So you found time to write your book. You went to a writer's convention. When did you actually publish?
Last January is when it came out. So it's
2022 or
2022.
Okay. So you published in January. And that excitement, there's nothing like it, huh? Holding your own.
No, it seemed very surreal. It still doesn't seem real a lot of times.
Yeah. And so what are your next steps from here? Are you just out to just keep sharing just the book, or is there something else you want to do?
Well, right now I'm just trying to cherish the time with my infant. So I didn't do a whole lot after the book came out. I just kind of let it sit. And if people asked for it, I would just give it out. And I bought like a whole bunch just so that I could just give them out to people whenever they asked for it. Yeah. And that's really what I want to do is just, oh, you're homeschooling and you
Here
don't know
you go.
anything. Oh, you're like where I was. So here, this is just it's a
Yeah.
quick read.
Uh-huh.
Because we don't have time as moms to read really, really big, thick books, or at least I don't. I'm not a quick reader. So I was just able to do that. And I just kind of sat on it for a while. And my daughter's she's not even 3 months old yet. So um, the company Wespo, who I published with, has called a few times. They're like, so what's your plan for, getting the word out there? And I'm like, well, nothing right now. I'm just kind of letting it sit. And just kind of taking whatever steps come in front of me and handing it out when I have opportunities. But my husband had the idea. He's like, well, you should contact podcasts. And I was like, I think I would actually really enjoy doing that because
You can do it from home.
it's fun. And I like talking to other people about what we're passionate about. So
Why do you think I keep interviewing? I love it. I started early on in the podcast with quite a few interviews and I was pretty terrible at it. So I took a long hiatus. I mean, I put in a few interviews there, but I recognized I just needed to get good at podcasting on my own for a while. So I did that. And now I'm interviewing a lot of people. Like I think I told you today, I did 4 interviews.
Yeah.
So I am interviewing a lot now because I feel like, okay, I'm finally ready for this again. I've simplified things and made it easy for myself. But I really love visiting with people like you and just helping parents connect with the homeschooling resources that they need. So I want to ask you a little bit more about your book. So you can homeschool, you sort of go into the ins and outs of homeschooling. I'm assuming, am I right?
Yes.
I haven't read it yet. I haven't actually got my hands on the copy yet. But what was your favorite story from one of the other parents that you interviewed in there?
Oh man, so many pop up into my head. The first one, I'll just tell you, her name is Michelle. She does classical conversations. So I have an interview for each of the different methods that are out there. So you've got your online, traditional, Charlotte Mason, Montessori, Waldorf, all the different methods. Unschooling. So I even have a chapter written by my friend Megan, who wrote the unschooling section in the book. So man, I could pick, I don't even know which one, but I'll start with Michelle. She does the classical approach. And she has 9 children. So she's been doing this for a while. She has 3 grandchildren who are the same age as her younger kids. So she had lots of kids, lots of experience. And I just learned so much from her about the classical approach. It wasn't one that I was doing with my kids, but I had started implementing just different ideas of the classical approach into mine, where like the chanting and the singing to kind of at the younger ages really get those concepts in your head. But she talked a lot about the different her different kids and their reading levels and how they all read at different times. She had one kid who was ready at age 4 and another kid who was ready at age 9. So she just has these wide varieties of children who have learned to read at different times. And she really learned early on not to push her kids before they were ready. And that to me was like so enlightening and so relieving that I didn't have to worry if my 7-year-old wasn't ready to read. I could let her read when her brain was ready to read. And I've learned that whenever I try to push my kids to do anything before they're ready, it backfires on me and it actually stunts them from really moving forward. So her story was just so inspiring to me that she's able to just let that go and just say, I'm not going to introduce concepts until my kids are ready for them.
Yes. Yeah. And I think you were listening to an interview. You mentioned it to me in an email that was all about that with Mary Gallagher from Teach a Child to Read. And we talked a lot about that, because I think you do so much feel that pressure of like, this is what's grade level. This is what's grade appropriate. My kid should be doing this. And this is the other part. I'm a failure as a mom if they're not.
Right. And you're not a failure.
Like that fell out of my mouth there because I felt it, right? You feel like if your kids aren't getting it, you're failing.
Right.
But are you failing?
No, And that to me was just like, I'm not a failure. And that is something we all need to hear all the time, that our kids are unique and they're different. And it's okay. It's okay if your kid, I mean, even I've heard research done that shows that the brain sometimes is not even ready to read until age 12. I mean, that sounds really dramatic. But she's had, I mean, but even the reading part of your brain, it doesn't even fully develop until between ages 7 and 12. And so I think when we try to push things too soon, we're actually doing ourselves a disservice, but we do it because
Doing
we're
our
trying to keep up
children
with
a
prestige
disservice.
or yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah, I know. My kids were young. Sometimes I felt so frustrated in various things. And let's take soccer as an example. All these moms were signing their kids up for soccer at age 3. Now I have a degree in physical education. I'm thinking this is ridiculous. This is not necessary. What is the rush? But really, what is the rush? Why do they need to be on a soccer field? All they need is a ball in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they need. And maybe a
Mm-hmm.
playmate to kick it around
Right.
with. They're actually
Yeah.
going to develop far more skills kicking a ball around with one kid than with, how many kids are on a soccer team? I don't even remember. But,
I'm not a soccer mom.
and
I don't know.
yeah, it's, but sometimes I think as a parent, we can tie up our own identity, and especially as a homeschooling parent, and our
Mm-hmm.
children, and our
Mm-hmm.
children's success is our success.
Right.
But
Yep.
that's not the
Guilty of
case.
that.
And there's a difference between ignoring your child and not even like reading books to them. Of course, they're not going to learn how to read when you're not even reading books to them.
Right.
That's neglect.
Mm-hmm.
Versus you're sitting there reading books to your child, you're pointing at the words, you're helping. Maybe you
Mm-hmm.
feel like your kid should be learning this, so you're going out and you're figuring out a few more things to help your child learn, but they're still not picking it up. That, to me, that just is like they're not quite ready. Now
Mm-hmm.
there could be
Yeah.
something like dyslexia, which there's a good interview on the podcast about that.
Mm-hmm.
Where maybe there are some things that you need to take into consideration. But
Mm-hmm.
when you take all those things into consideration, if they're just not ready, they're just not ready. And that's okay.
Right.
And it doesn't
Yeah.
mean you failed as a mom if your kid can't read at 3 or at 5 or at 6 even.
Right.
Like
Right.
you
Mm-hmm.
just keep presenting, and it's sort of,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah. It's like they're not failing if
Right.
and you're not failing as a mom. Like you're trying, and you're giving, you're providing opportunity. That's what I'm trying to say. If you're
Yeah.
providing the opportunity and it's not sinking in, it's okay. Just keep providing
Mm-hmm.
the opportunity.
Yeah. And what I appreciated from your podcast that we were referring to, teaching children to read through storytelling, is that it's okay. It's okay for them to go at that pace. And honestly, I can't remember what I was going to say about that, but I really appreciated that, and just kind of reinstilled the fact that like it's okay that that's what it was, that look for progress, not necessarily I remember exactly how you phrased it, but
Not
as long as they're
perfection.
progressing, they don't have to necessarily be at this level. But that just is so relieving to me. Like, okay, yeah, she's making little steps, and they're little right now, but they are steps forward.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that can be encouraging.
Carrie, how long did it take you to write your book?
It took a year.
So, and your book was longer than mine, I think, but it took me 6 months. And then after I lost it, it took me another 5 months. And, but it's sort of like, it doesn't matter. We were both progressing, right? That's the point I'm trying to make. It doesn't matter if it took you a year and somebody else 4 years.
Right.
And me 6 months, but then it took way longer to get it out there because I kept editing it and editing it and editing it. And I can look back now and go, I was procrastinating with perfectionism. I was scared, which is why it went through ridiculous numbers of edits.
I can relate to that.
And in some areas I just sort of stripped the life out of it, like, you learn.
Yeah.
And it still serves. It still is helpful to people, but I was scared. I was scared to put myself out there. Right. So but
Uh-huh.
it's
Hmm.
okay. You keep going. You just keep going
Yeah.
and you keep making those steps. It doesn't matter how long it takes, as long as you're
Yeah.
progressing. And,
Right.
and if that's what you want to be doing as an adult. But I look at us as adults, and we are not all standing around going, okay, you're 32 years old, you should be doing this. Oh, at 25,
Exactly.
you should be doing this. It's
Right.
like
Yeah.
you're kept in this little cage of, you should do this, this, and this. Okay, now that you're 18, you can do whatever the hell you want. It's like I don't get it. It's like we want, I don't know. Sometimes I look at our educational system and what we expect of our children, and it's like we want diversity everywhere in the world except in education.
Hmm. Wow. That's a good point. That
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm like, why can't we have
Mm,
diversity in education?
yeah.
Do we all have to learn the exact same things? What a boring world. Why, like I can look
Uh,
at my sister
wow.
and she is just so creative. The girl, she can make the most beautiful cakes. She should be a card writer for Hallmark. I mean, like she should have her own Hallmark, actually. She's amazing creatively. And she
Wow.
struggled in school, struggled
Mm,
because she didn't excel in what they wanted her to excel in, which
mm-hmm.
school was created to create good employees.
Mm-hmm.
So your math, your writing, but the drawing, all that artistic stuff just didn't matter.
Right. Oh,
And so
yeah.
she struggled. Why couldn't there be
Yeah.
diversity in education? Why couldn't she feel like a rock star as a kid?
Exactly.
And that's what we need to
Yeah.
do as parents, is keep our kids feeling like rock stars in their own lives. you know
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so good. Yes. Yeah.
so, well,
Yeah.
I
And
guess,
I mean, go
oh, go
ahead.
ahead.
Well, it's sad that I feel like there's one way that children are assessed in the school, and that's through test taking. And it's like, if you don't do well on this test, then you're a failure at life. And I was a terrible test taker.
Yeah,
I
some
mean,
people get anxiety around it. It
oh,
has
I do.
nothing
Yeah.
to
I
do
got
with
like
their
I won't
intelligence.
even say, but
Go ahead.
my ACT scores were terrible. Like I couldn't get into a college because my test scores were awful, but I could get a 4.0 in school. And it was just the way that we assess children is just so narrow, when it's like I think we miss out on all of the like you were saying, like all the gifts and skills that our kids really have if we're only like testing them in this one little
Hmm.
way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember when my daughter was younger, there was another girl that she was acquainted with, and the girl could play piano beautifully. Now, she was probably good at all
Mm,
sorts of other things. I have no idea what her academics were like. But what I know is that kid could have just played piano for the rest of her life and done just
mm.
fine. Like, yeah, have the basics and some other things, and she was just amazing. And you meet people like that. We're like, they're
Yeah.
so talented, but maybe it's not what the school system wants. And as parents, I think we need to recognize that in our own
Mm-hmm.
homes as we educate our
Mm-hmm.
children. Yes, they need basic skills here, here, and here,
Right.
but let's also look at the gifts that they have and help them really strengthen those. So,
Yeah.
well, I just realized a few minutes ago, we are really up against the time here. Are there any, well, first of all, let me tell our listeners, you can get Carrie's book, You Can Homeschool. Drop down to the show notes. You'll find a link to the book and we'll direct you in the right place, but it's in various places. HomeSchoolThinkTank.com/interviews. You will find Carrie's book on that page, and a little blurb, a little bio about her, and any links that we want to include in that. But if you could share one message, just like one parting thought with other parents, what would you say to them? Let's say a parent, your book is geared to parents who want to homeschool. So let's send this message to
Mm-hmm.
people who aren't homeschooling yet. What do you want to tell them?
You are enough. You are capable. If you are being put in charge, you've been gifted with these children, and the Lord has stewarded you with these children, and that's all you need. You are enough. You can do it. If I can, You can. I was actually going to retitle the book, If I Can Do This, So Can You, because you don't have to be a professional teacher. You don't have to be a writer. If you love your children and you want the best for them, I believe that you can succeed at homeschooling. And you don't need to know everything that there is to know out there to homeschool or to get started. There are, my book is the few things I wish I had known before starting, but I started before I wrote this book. So you don't even have to have that. So um, I just want to be able to give confidence to those parents that if you feel like homeschooling is what you want to do, that yes, you can do it. And there
You are
are great
enough.
resources out there. You're enough.
I
Mhm.
love it. I love it. And you can homeschool.
Yes, you
Right?
can.
That's why you titled it that way. You can homeschool. So, Carrie, thank you so much for being my guest on the podcast today. I am delighted to have you.
Well, thank